Hi, and welcome to History Respawned. I'm your host, Bob Whitaker. I'm joined today by the pride of Cork, Dr. John Harney. Hey, John.
Hey, Bob. I love it. I love the intro.
Awesome. So today, John and I are playing Humankind from Amplitude Studios, which came out a month ago. But in grand History Respawn tradition, we are only now getting around to doing a stream. So John and I have been playing this on and off for the past month. I've played maybe about 30 hours of it. John, what about you? What have you got in this game so far?
I played about 20 hours on my own, and then my son played 10 hours, which mostly involved trying to build janissaries. He became really focused on that. So a little bit behind you, but I've played a bunch of it. I've gotten up into those later time periods with at least one playthrough.
Oh, awesome. Great. Yeah, I haven't really gotten into the later time periods, which maybe we can we can talk about with relation to this. But as you know, if you've been following History Respawn, you know that we have been spending a lot of time this year talking about 4X titles, and in particular looking at Sid Meier's Civilization series. And this game fits well into that conversation. And so we're going to focus in this episode on, how this game is depicting and then also using history, and use this as a conversation also comparing this game, Humankind, to Sid Meier's Civilization, but then also to Old World, which came out a couple months ago. So really, hopefully a useful conversation, one I'm really excited to have, because John, I don't know about you, but I've avoided reading the reviews of this game. I kind of want to develop my own opinion about it, and I haven't really talked to you about it either, so this will all be new to me.
Yeah, it'd be great. No, I it's funny what you should do when you feel ready. Go back and read a couple. It's kind of what I did after I'd played it a good bit. I was kind of amused. I think coverage of the game. This is not going to be like a slam dunk. You should buy this. It's kind of not the reviews it's getting.
Mm-hmm.
But people should always do this, I guess. But read the text of the reviews, because I found them quite fascinating. Because people have genuinely ambivalent, but not in a negative sense, feelings about the game.
Yeah.
As do I. By the way.
I would say, yeah, just at the top, I feel like this game tries some things, and it's definitely a 4X game, but it is definitely very different from Civ, and I appreciate the attempts that it's making, even if I feel like it's not always successful in those attempts.
I feel very, very similarly. Overall, I really like it, but I have a lot. I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, so you see this handsome fellow over here. This is my avatar. And so if you haven't played Humankind, one of the things that it does is it has you create your own player character, I guess your own player emperor. And you can use these presets, or you can create your own. I went over here and I used a preset, but this is a stand-in for the old civilization thing of, picking a world leader, a famous historical leader, to play as. And I think that this is an interesting approach. I think it's one that reflects kind of modern gaming trends. Think about massive online games, Fortnite, PUBG, all of these games kind of do the same thing of making your own avatar. But it is, I think, unique for a 4X game where, usually you're playing as a major historical figure. This one, you get to make your own. I think that's fun. That's different.
And it also showcases, I've said this before on podcasts and stuff, people have probably heard me say it, I kind of love everything Amplitude does. And they've brought their art style to this. I think a game that a lot of people might make connections to is Endless Legend, which is kind of the fantasy themed type game they made before. And I wouldn't say they've sanded the edges down per se, but they've gone for what if we did Civ approach, and I really dig it.
Mm-hmm.
That was my avatar just there. That's the one I always seem to land on. The woman with the chain around her neck,
That's
the Lord
great.
Mayor type look.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the look. This game looks. I love the way it looks. I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think it's really good.
Let's close without saving. We're fine. Yeah, so I thought, for the purposes of this stream, we would just jump into a new game here. You can see here I've got one as the Olmec culture. 51 turns in. I was just kind of goofing around with one of the lower difficulty settings, actually. And so when you start up a game here, you've got kind of traditional 4X options, world size. The pace of the game will do normal, I think, for this one. And then difficulty, I'll maybe bump it up to Hamlet. I've been playing a lot on Metropolis and the Nation, and I've been having some trouble, actually. I feel like the game is a little bit more difficult than I was expecting.
What I found, and we might talk about this, and I won't get all the way to like the early modern period, is like I got into these kind of bumps a lot,
Mm-hmm.
where things felt like they're going very smoothly, and then suddenly they were kind of hard,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of happened to me quite a bit, and I'm not sure how much of that is their attempt to stop the classic Civ. I have Jeeps and GIs from 1945 going against chariots type stuff.
Yeah.
Well, you can still kind of make that happen to a certain extent. I also play in dad mode exclusively now. Every game I ever play, like easier. I want to see what they did with the game, and so I play easy a lot. But like I found, maybe we'll get into this as the conversation goes on. Like I found the diplomacy system. I had some bug stuff which didn't help. Which is
Same.
the game had
Same.
just come out, so I found the diplomacy system kind of difficult to navigate.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think it's bug related. I don't think it's designed to work like that.
Yeah, I literally didn't know what the information was. So the bug for people watching was that I was being told when I moused over a group, the relationship we had didn't match what the system was telling me we had. So it wasn't clear to me if it was just the text was wrong or I didn't know what was going on.
Mm-hmm. So the game starts with this very civilization-like cutscene with the voiceover from this rather, I think, snide voice actor. I don't know what you think of it, John, but I found his voice to be a bit off-putting.
He's a very particular type of English patrician accent. Yeah.
Yes.
It is what it is.
But this game, I think another great thing that it does is it starts in the Neolithic period, and this is I'm in the midst of teaching the first half of Western Civ right now, and this is where I start my class. And so I think this is a really cool way to start a 4X game. I think Civ, you're kind of already starting from the basis of having an established civilization, having leaders. But this game, you start out as a nomadic hunter-gatherer tribe in the Neolithic era. And I do like the line here it has at the end where civilization starts with having barbecues. I think that's fantastic. But I think starting it in the Neolithic era with nomadic hunter-gatherers, it's a historically authentic touch. And I also really like the fact, and we'll see this here in a moment, of you've got to kind of establish your empire, but you've got to do that while also worrying about animals, which is, of course, a really big part of several thousands of years of human history, is worrying about getting murdered by animals. And so I think that is it's a really good touch, but it's also one that I think ties human history more closely to the land, which I think when you study the history of civilizations, particularly Western Civ, there's an emphasis on, man's dominance of the land. But I think, as time has gone on and, the study of ancient history has gone on, there's been much more of an emphasis in scholarship on the relationship between man and the environment and how man is often beholden to the environment. So I think that starting in the Neolithic age really does a good job of hammering that point home.
Yeah, one of the things I like about Humankind, and it's hard to know how much of it is deliberate or how much of it is, by osmosis, as people say, which is not actually an accurate use of the word osmosis, but, this sense of like where the larger cultural conversations are, because that is I think that's interesting. We'll talk about this later, but like, so, when this, sorry, are we the Olmecs again? Who are we now, Bob, actually?
Oh, no,
we
just...
We haven't done that yet.
Yeah, so
that's right.
We haven't picked a culture because we're just a nomadic
that's
tribe.
Right.
And so, yeah, so it's great. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. And then as you kind of level up through the game, maybe you'll be Olmecs, maybe you'll be somebody else, and you can go from, I went in one of my playthroughs from Phoenicians to Umayyads to Janissaries, and you could be the British then in the industrial period, in a way that, if you're thinking of the land and the part of the world, different peoples live in parts of the world and they go through these phases as you go through. And so that was another really interesting thing to me.
Even those
And
who
the
have
ongoing,
disappeared may have
you
done
know,
something very
how
clever.
they know it's a game, so you'll see resources. There's a resource with a question mark right now.
Mm-hmm.
At some point, we will know what that is, and then we can use it.
Mm-hmm.
So in one of my playthroughs, it turned out to be what you need to make gunpowder, and looked like I had to go to war with my neighbor because he had a node and I didn't. So there's all these kind of fascinating things that play out.
Yeah. So I think we've got some good resources here. I might jump in and grab this. What is some kind of food discovery here? Yeah, curiosity. And so you go along, and these curiosities show up, and they're kind of like the Humankind's version of the villages that you discover at the beginning of a civilization game. But I think I'm going to go ahead and set up my first outpost here, and it looks like I can set it up right here. So let's do that, just for fun. So these outposts, these become kind of the building blocks of your civilization or your empire, as Humankind calls them. And you can pop them up in these different regional areas throughout the game, and then eventually, once time passes and you've gained enough resources, you can turn them into cities. I think I'm going to go with
I found
this.
that a little bit tricky earlier, and that's something that's been an interesting experience for me in the game. Sometimes I feel like the game is designed for multiple playthroughs,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that there were so many mechanics where I feel like there's stuff going on here and I don't fully get it. There is stuff to get, and cities and outposts where it took me a while. Like I think I was in the medieval period in my first playthrough when I finally felt like I think I'm getting a handle on what cities are now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it's just different. And so part of me wonders to what extent Humankind could find its most ardent supporters among people who just like to play 4X games and will play a lot of 4X games,
Mm-hmm.
versus someone like me who will play a distressing amount of Civ, but then uninstall it for like months at a time and then bring it back. Like it's not my go-to genre. It's not my go-to game.
Yes, and I feel like this is a game, and we're really early on, so it's difficult if you haven't played it to judge it on this level. But this is the type of game that I could see, like you said, somebody obsessively playing, but it's not an easy game to just pick up and play. I feel like it's a little bit more obtuse in some of the ways it does things when you compare it to something like Civ, which, like you said, you could go several months without playing. You could go maybe years between installments, but then you kind of have this knowledge of how to play it regardless. Whereas I think this game doesn't really fit into that category.
Yeah, it's kind of and the elephant in the room, as they say. Like we don't want to compare this to Civ the whole way through, but then again, Amplitude kind of did a little bit. There's an animal that kind of looks like he's leaving you alone for now.
I'm gonna leave him alone too. I might attack one just so we can look at the battle system.
And so I wouldn't want to be reductive, because I don't think that this game would have to like beat Civ to be a success. I think it's actually, I do think it's a good game, but you kind of can't help it a little bit. And whatever that Civ alchemy is, that you get the basics. It feels like you've got the basics very, very, very quickly. And this just isn't that.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the things that contribute to that make it a kind of an interesting game. A very interesting game. And then historically make it an interesting game, so that the whole thing of, so you could switch from Phoenicians to Umayyads to Ottomans, as I did, or to Koreans, or to whatever. The game is not trying to funnel you into some kind of, oh, well, you were the Greeks, then you get to be, I don't know, the Germans or something, and then you get to be the, like there's no implicit or otherwise kind of guiding of like, this is the group you should be. And so that's where the game really starts to shine. Like the religion stuff, although maybe if you were being critical, you could say it's not that different from some of the stuff Civ has done the last 3 or 4 years. That was even in ways they did the religion, the UI and stuff. I kind of felt like I'm kind of getting this as an additional layer in a way that I haven't got in recent Civ games.
Mm-hmm.
So all those things really kind of add up to being interesting. But I think the cost of it then is like, I didn't know what an outpost was for like 3 hours in my life, real life of playing the game.
Yeah, they do a bit of hand holding, but I feel like the outpost system is one that could use more hand holding than what we get. And something you notice here too, I think this is coming across in the stream as well, is that Topography really matters a lot in this game. You see that there's variations in elevation. We've got these kind of foothills here, and then mountain ranges here. And so these matter a lot, especially when you're attempting to traverse over different regions, but then also during combat. Really huge multipliers added on for having the high ground. And, there's some sense of high ground in Civilization games. You have hills in particular that can give you an advantage, but not in this sort of way, and certainly not the kind of I think the gorgeous topography that you get in Humankind. Really, really, really nice detailed map, and really wonderful physical features for the map as well. Oh, look at this tiny little elephant! Look at him! Oh, hi! I never noticed that before.
And as with other games of this type in recent years, like you can get various bonuses for discovering kind of national landmarks, or either being the first of your community to do so, and that factors into the kind of multiple resource kind of economy of the game, where you have the purple stars. I think they're called prestige. Can't quite recall.
What are they called? Influence.
Influence.
That's it.
Yeah. And so that at first I was very skeptical of the influence / money kind of dual resource thing, but actually it works pretty smoothly. Actually, it's very intuitive and it's not a problem at all.
So here we've got a look at the different eras that we'll go through. We've got the Neolithic era right now. We'll go through the Ancient era next. And as you see, as you go along, you collect these fame points, and these become the basis for victory in the game, or at least one of the different victory conditions in the game. So as you could probably guess, we've got the Neolithic era, the Ancient era, Classical era, and you go through these different eras of history, and those eras are pretty similar to the type of era dynamics that you've got in Rise and Fall games in Civilization. So Civilization 4, Rise and Fall, and then also Civ 6, the Rise and Fall mechanics there, where you go through different eras. And I think those mechanics are really pretty well done here. I don't know what you think of it, John, but I like the fact that you can, collect points. You can collect stars and fame points in each one of these eras. And so you could, theoretically, I haven't done this yet, but you could theoretically score a bunch of points early on in the game, say like in the Neolithic, the Ancient and Classical era, and then maybe not do so well at the end, but you would still have collected enough points to win the game based on your fame score, which I think is interesting. I think it also kind of reflects, a more evolved sense of the ebbs and flows of civilizations or societies, where they could be really successful in one era, but then maybe kind of a backseat player in a different era, but that doesn't take the shine off of what they achieved up to that point.
Yeah, I agree. And I've had playthroughs where, funnily enough, the Mongols were very, very, very powerful globally in one of my playthroughs, kind of when I was in my medieval period. And by the time I got to the early modern, they had kind of, I'm not sure if stagnated is quite the right word, but they hadn't just steamrolled the whole game. They had kind of lost a bit of momentum. And so we kind of reached into a point where, they're not going to invade because there's no point to. And I don't know that I was ascribing too much to the AI there. I think that kind of hints at kind of an AI that when it's working could be quite impressive, actually.
Yeah.
So I like that.
Yeah.
And here we are. You did it. You leveled up.
I did. Yeah. So this is we're starting a new era, and we get to pick our first culture. So let's go ahead and choose that now. So like John was saying before, you can go through many different cultures as you play. And you start as a Neolithic nomadic tribe. But then once you reach a certain point, go into the Ancient era, you get to pick what culture you are going to identify as. And so you can see here there's these grayed out ones. These are two cultures that have already been picked by computer players, but then we've got these other options open. And these options of cultures, they are tied to the specific era from which they originated from, or from which they were kind of in their glory years, right? Their golden age. So this includes Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Hittites, Numidians, Phoenicians, kind of the usual characters that we talk about in a world history course when it comes to the Ancient era. And each one of these cultures have particularly advantages that go along with them, particularly units as well. So you can see here with the Egyptians, they can build the pyramid district, and gives you kind of extra industry. The Babylonians, they have the astronomy house, which gives you extra science. And then the Assyrians, district fortifications, right? The Assyrians famous for their siege warfare and their defensive structures. So it's an interesting touch, I think, to allow you to pick a civ, if you were so late, or a cultural affinity so late. And what's interesting about this game, as John was talking about, is that you can change your culture as you go along. You do have the option to stick with one culture into a different era of history, but at the same time, the game kind of encourages you to, say, switch from the Egyptians to the Romans, for instance, or switch from the Babylonians to classical Greek. And so it's an interesting idea, and it's one that I think reflects kind of a modern day multicultural approach to the discussion of civilizations and societies, right? They're not just these monolithic civilizations that we tended to be taught in the 20th century, but instead they are the reflection of multiple different influences, multiple different cultures. And I think you get that idea here in this game through the changing of cultures as the game progresses.
Yeah, I completely agree. I like what the game does. I think that there's no question historians continue to complain about some of these descriptions and stuff because, I mean, any civilization or society put down to like a card, right? And like video game statistics, choices have to be made and everything else. But what I like about it, for example, in kind of my longest playthrough, I decided to go full on science, and just chasing science bonuses brought me to communities that historically speaking, different parts of the world, different religious systems, different everything that don't, quote unquote, don't fit together in this kind of line. And the game doesn't really care, in that sense. And then I think it was the Umayyads have like a special power, a special ability you can activate where you take a city and its production output can just become science output, and you can just leave it on for as long as you like.
Yeah.
And so I got to a point where I was just a bit of a glass hammer militarily, but just churning through science, like discovering things every 3 turns. And that was great. I felt like I broke the game in a way they planned for me to. And it kind of breaks them away from some of the criticisms that are discussed in terms of civilization as well.
Yes. Yeah. And I think also, being able to change cultures on the fly allows you to adapt to the game circumstances. So say, for instance, you are the Egyptians here in the ancient era, and you're kind of focused on building up and you're focused on industry, but then you might run across somebody who's more warlike, right? As the Egyptians, you might run into the Hittites. And so then you might change in the next era and you might adopt a more warlike culture, right? Say the Romans, for instance. And then you'd be able to kind of adapt to the situations that you found yourself in rather than in a traditional Civ game where you are kind of laser focused from the very beginning on reaching victory conditions and playing to the strengths of whatever Civ that you adopted.
Yeah, no, exactly. And again, this is the kind of thing that happens historically. This is what helps shape kind of major shifts in government types and things in different kind of parts of the world, So I like that. And I think that I guess I'm kind of making this point, but just to spell it out, I think the kind of the game mechanic stuff here, I think is rock solid and is very good. And I think most of the time, decisions they made from a gameplay perspective have dovetailed quite nicely with kind of what we as historians tend to kind of be interested in and chat about on this channel. So I think that's a success for the game. And again, certainly people can continue to criticize it, and there's an extent to which a 4X game is always going to be open to criticism in that way. I find it's one of my favorite things about this game, that I feel it's kind of broken away from those 4X games in a kind of a dramatic fashion. That's exciting.
So here we've got just kind of a non-aligned empire here. So I might actually attack them just so we can get a look at the battle of mechanics. Nothing against them in particular, but just so we can get a look at those for this stream, this brief stream here.
And you could, you alternatively, you're not going to do it, but for people watching, like, so Bob could have either bought them off or worked really hard diplomatically in a system that isn't that far away from how Civ 6 treats city-states, actually. But that's also an option.
So here we've got a look at the diplomatic thing, and this is something that the computer control player likes to do at the beginning, is opening up for trade and luxuries. So I'll go ahead and accept this. And you get a little bit of dialogue here from your avatar with the computer player, and I'd say the delivery of these lines is a little bit strange, and it's not quite up to the level, I think, of the performances of the leaders from Civilization 6, for instance, but it's still fun. It's a nice touch. It helps to, kind of build your interest in your avatar. Although, I kind of wonder, looking at these kind of generated avatars that we've got here, and you can create your own and, change their face and features and everything. But I kind of wonder if a lot of players wouldn't be put off from that. I mean, I think one of the reasons why Civ is so compelling, and one of the things we talk a lot about in our series Civs 101, is that people like to roleplay as these famous historical figures, and they like to maybe attack famous historical figures because they don't like them. And so I'm wondering if some of that's lost here with the creation of your own avatar for this 4X game.
Well, what jumped out to me when I first played this game as well, that if you had rejected that trade offer, they would have been aggrieved. And in the mechanic, when you do that, when you reject an offer, or when an offer is rejected rather that you offered, it theoretically it affects war support and all these different things, and theoretically makes it easier to declare war on a neighbor. And so they've done some things like that. They've kind of tried, and this game is like that. Like, we're seeing it now with Battle. They're not afraid to break parts of the game into discrete minigame mechanic type things, which might be a lover-hated thing. I like it. But that works in diplomacy, and we're seeing here with Bob in the Battle now, you're doing your deployment.
Yes.
In your kind of mini hex war game thing that's going on.
Yeah, so you have the option in this game of doing an automatic battle, which is similar to what you see typically in a Civilization title, but they've also broken down the battle system to include like John was saying, kind of a mini tactical war game here. So you've got a deployment phase bordered off with this white line around these hexes, so you can deploy your troops anywhere along there. And you've got, for each one of your units, usually it's a set of stacked units. So if you played Civilization 4, the roaming units of death, the towers of death, it was very similar to that. And so usually you have 2 to 3 units in a stack. And then so once you go into one of these tactical modes, those units split off and they can attack from different directions, they can flank, etc. So yeah, let's see how this works. So they've gone into a defensive position here in the high ground, and so this is where topography really matters quite a lot, right? So now I can let them try to come to me, which they probably won't do, so I'm gonna go attack them, I think. See if anybody can go up here. They can't, but I can grab their flag, I suppose.
And there are multiple ways to win. Like, it's not just eradicate opponents. So there's kind of, if you can capture a flag and hold it. I'm trying to recall.
Yes.
The defending player has a bit of an advantage. So you can theoretically hold on to avoid defeat in a way that doesn't really happen in Civ conflict.
Yes, and then another interesting thing about this mechanic is that the battles can last multiple turns. So you can have a deployment. You could go on to some other work that you've got going on in your empire and then backtrack back to the battle. So it's interesting, but I've got to say I don't really like it. With all that preface, all that introduction out of the way, I would say that once you get to subsequent eras of history in this game, and you get into even the classical era, you run into these situations where you're getting a lot of battles per turn if you're fighting, and having things slow down to play these mini war games, it takes up a lot of time. And I mean, I don't know what you think, John. Maybe you enjoy it, but for me, I think it kind of bogs down the momentum of the game quite a bit.
Yeah. My experience was I felt like they tweaked it to the point where, especially in close encounters, it was kind of worth taking control of the battle,
Yes.
because you could kind of make the most of it. But especially if you had any kind of a reasonable advantage, you could just, if you wanted, just kind of just quick fight it, or whatever the proper term is, and you could do it like a Civ style thing. So I kind of liked that ability to opt in and opt out. What kind of struggled with in early playthroughs in particular was, you can't always see what you're up against when you're attacking somebody, which is fair enough. Um, and so suddenly, the game is like, hey, you should have long range trebuchets and stuff. I'm like, I don't have any of those. Like, well, you're gonna lose, and that's it. That was kind of a frustrating experience, a little bit, and that kind of turned me off. That was a little bit disappointing. Yeah, I think it adds a lot of texture to it, and I think they did their best to make it something you didn't need to do, but try not to make it just something you just skip through.
Yeah.
Because
if you if you auto resolve, you're really taking a big risk. I mean, it definitely has that feel of, like, say, an XCOM. Like an XCOM game where it says when you're taking a shot, you've got like a 95% chance of hitting this shot, but then it turns out you miss. Right? It definitely has that feel with the auto battles where you're like, oh yeah, I mean, we've got overwhelming. An advantage here. We should win. I'll just hit auto battle, and more often than not, it turns out to be a bad idea.
Yeah, like one of my issues with it, like, overall, I definitely am a fan of the game. And as I said earlier, I feel the game is almost anticipating you playing it a lot and learning through it, which some games work that way. And I just kind of felt like, the game needs you to figure out, plan ahead and figure these things out. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to play it that way. The game wants to reward you for preparing in very particular ways.
Yes.
And I don't know that that's the way I want to play this game. And that might be a me problem. That might not be Amplitude's problem. But that's where I personally am.
Mm-hmm. So here we've got our chance to pick our first civic. And so we've got multiculturalism versus monoculturalism. And you can see here we've got these different options along the side that determine your civics, and they give you different bonuses. So you can see here, if we go with monoculture, we've got stability increasing, but then if we go with multiculturalism, we get extra influence points for the main plaza. And so, there's civic mechanics in other 4X games, particularly in Civ. Civ 6, they use civic mechanics basically in a card system, right, where you're picking different cards, and then that applies to what your civilization is, how they view the world. But this game, I think this is probably my favorite part of this game, is how they treat civics, because they treat it as though it is on a spectrum. And so you can start the game one way, and emphasizing homeland versus emphasizing world and cooperation. You can start with homeland at the beginning, and then kind of slowly etch your way back towards world if you want in later periods. And I think that's great because it kind of is taking into account the decisions you've made up to that point, later on in the game. You don't really get a sense of it here because you start at the baseline at the beginning. But later on, it definitely makes a big difference. Whereas with Civilization and their civics mechanic, once you get rid of the card that determines your civic, it basically means that you are wiping the slate clean, right? You can basically completely change course over the course of the game, which I think is kind of ridiculous. It makes sense in a game, but in terms of, what we would be interested in, historical authenticity, I think this system makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and even like the graphic representation of this kind of semicircular kind of chart kind of thing is quite intriguing. And the technology tree, they've just gone ahead and embraced the tree element, I suppose. But there's all these little attempts to use the space of the screen to give that message visually as well.
Yes.
Which I quite liked. And also, and something, by the way, I'm a fan of in this game, it's true of in the civics particularly, but like a lot of the kind of, I guess what you'd call copy, I don't know what they actually came writers actually call it, like blurbs and little bits and pieces here and there. I love the way a lot of that is done. So do you want to encourage a free press or state controlled things like this? Like all these little ways they've just given these little 1 or 2 sentence embellishments.
Mm-hmm.
I really like
Mm-hmm.
like when the decision comes up. So
Mm-hmm.
that stuff is great. And like little tiny little bits of art to illustrate that. All those little things, like this game has a very strong identity to it, a visual identity, which I think works in its favor.
Yeah, these little
Like these
texts
beautiful
here.
cards.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
cards,
exactly.
and then the
Exactly.
text, a method of watering crops and reinvigorating soils. So just like little blurbs. And so it's not a full Civlopedia entry, which I think I do miss, when comparing this to Civ. But it is a nice little bit of text, like you said, that I think gets to the point of what this is about, why it's important, without, hitting you over the head with this huge block of text in a Civlopedia. So, yeah, I think it works nice. I think you're right about that. I think it's a nice touch.
And mentioning flood irrigation and things like that, when it comes to improvements of individual cities, there's no question that there's obviously a lot of overlap with other 4X games, like their version of the granary, for example,
Yeah.
right? Like their version of the aqueduct. But I do think, especially as the cities get bigger, won't get into this playthrough really, your options really start to open up for kind of what you want this city to be.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also, like I had one city on the coast that completely fluked it, honestly. It was just a powerhouse. I could build almost anything,
Mm-hmm.
like in like 3 turns, I could build everything. Um, and so I quite like that. And you have the buyout options and stuff. And so at
Mm-hmm.
the moment, your city there has that option to basically improve your influence
Yes.
generation, which
Yes.
early on actually is a good thing to invest in anyway.
Yes. Yeah. And one thing I would say, though, is by the time you get to the end of the game, or even pretty early on, there are so many things to build in this screen that it becomes pretty overwhelming. Particularly with infrastructure improvements, there's a real sense that I feel, I don't know if you feel like this, John, but there's a real sense that I feel really rushed with the development of
Yeah.
cities, in the sense that I get all of these options of things to build, and we don't get those here right now because we're so early on, but you can have up to 20 or 25 things to build infrastructure wise. And it's almost as though you get all these options, but you don't have enough time to build them because the eras go by so quickly. And so I end up feeling frustrated because I don't have enough time to build everything. And that's a really weird feeling. I feel like the game, in terms of construction, in terms of building, could be better paced in that regard.
what what I found, it took me a while to kind of really fully grasp the city outpost relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to get a sense of it then. So if you have a city with adjoining outposts, especially, it allows you to, it first of all, it really ramps up your production and things like that. For example, um, are we in a war?
We are, yeah.
Good. Oh, sorry, I missed that. So, but I was going to say, but what's interesting to me, at least in my playthroughs, is, and it's weird because Endless Legend did this with cities, but although they've changed the way cities work and they've tried to make it a sensible choice not to go for the build as many cities as possible idea, um, I liked Old World did a better job to bring Old World into the conversation, not just Civ games. Old World early this year has done a better job, I think, in allowing cities to feel like, well, this is a city full of woodworkers and carpenters that is run by this family, and this city over here is the one that kind of has all the temples in it. I didn't really do that in this game. All the cities were just different versions of developed cities. Some
Mm-hmm.
had more stuff than others. But
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't really specializing in those cities,
Mm-hmm.
which was something that in Old World I found myself doing quite a bit.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Yeah. Let's see. What else can we do here? I wonder if there's anything else. Mutinous. Oh, great. I haven't had trouble with this. So I might have to research this a bit and see how I can prevent that. It doesn't look like. Yeah, it's not great. I don't know if there's a way to improve stability. Cannot be done. Yeah.
I can't remember if moving a troop in there
Yeah, let's
actually
see.
helps.
Let's see if that
It
helps.
might. I did that first time I had a mutiny issue, but it wasn't clear to me if that was actually the reason it got better, which is another speaking to some of the issues of the game sometimes. And then what it'll do in the next turn, it'll tell you, right, it's at 5%, but when you hover over it, it will tell you what it's moving towards, or what the rate of growth or rate of decrease is.
Maybe I'll just have him station here and see what happens. Let's just see. Could be embarrassing for us, but hey, we won this important battle here against the pathetic computer opponent.
I will say, to stay on the city as well for a second. So they do something which Civ has done for years and years and years, which is you can allocate different groups in your city to different things a little bit. And I never really took advantage of that. And it wasn't clear to me, even at the lower difficulty levels, if I was kind of leaving points on the board, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
I focused on population growth a lot and kind of just went from there. And so again, is it a John problem? Is it a game problem? It could well just be a John problem.
Mm-hmm.
Part of me is like, I think there are people who will play, like people joke about the first 1,000 hours being the hardest of Dota 2. And I just wonder, like, will there be Humankind players who are like, oh no, don't worry, it clicks after 80 hours.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I could see that happening.
That could be the case. And that's one of the reasons why I think it was actually advantageous for us to wait so long to do a stream of this, because when you're considering a 4X game, it's a bit like considering a JRPG. Like, you don't really know the game until you're like 50 or 60 hours into it. And I feel like, I'm sure a lot of the reviewers, which I haven't read, but I'm sure a lot of the reviewers probably got about that amount of time into it. But for normal folks like us with day jobs, that's kind of a hard amount of hours to put into a game. And so I think having some time with this, having about a month to play it, has helped my estimation of the game. Because I think very early on, I was pretty negative on this game, but I think I've kind of warmed to it a bit as I've kind of better understood the outpost system, like you said, John.
Yeah, I probably, my journey probably went the other direction, in the sense I had this really wonderful kind of initial reaction to it, and then as I went on, it just became not even tempered per se, but it just kind of shifted to something else. And I would say as well, people watching, and like, we're not like a recommendations channel in that sense, but if you have if it's a PC game, the Xbox Game Pass for $10 a month, or I don't know if they're still doing the introductory pricing they were doing. This game is 100%, in my view, worth like $10 to see if you like it.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
This is a game I would really encourage people, if they have the time and if they're comfortable doing it, to really play yourself. Because I kind of feel it's difficult for me to convey. There's a complexity there, but I don't find it to be a complex or difficult game to play per se. Now, I run into these walls where it's like, wait a minute, am I doing something wrong? And that's not been the most fun. But there's a lot going on here. And I commented earlier, my son, my 7-year-old, really likes this game. I think he's attracted to the look of it. And I think that if you get into the arquebusiers, I can't never pronounce that, and janissaries and all these units, all these little cards, there's always a lot of kind of visual joy to be had as you go through it.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of, that history nerd that I also am, who just loves things like that, just really enjoys the aesthetics of this game.
Yes.
And some of those choices that they've made, like as you get into the industrial period and stuff, if you choose the British and all these little things, just lovely, lovely touches that really that just work well and makes it a fun game. Part of me wants a version, and maybe you can do this, I kind of almost want to say, like, let me just play it on my own, single Civ or whatever you call it, on an open world, and let me just build cities and hang out. And I would actually, I don't know that I would enjoy that in a Civ game, but I would totally play Humankind that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think so. I think that's right. Because it is kind of a game, going back to the kind of diplomacy and warfare, it is kind of a game, oddly, where you can get by pretty well without ever really attacking your opponents. And I feel like maybe this is just the levels that I'm playing at, the difficulty levels I'm playing at, but I feel like you can kind of turtle up a bit. You can focus on building up your own civilization, your empire, building your own cities and your own outposts, and using the diplomacy system to diffuse kind of ongoing issues with other civs. And I mean, I've had playthroughs of this where I've gotten into kind of the medieval period, middle portion of the game, and really not having any major excuse to go to war, because I'm succeeding in developing resources and developing cities on my own.
Well, my favorite experience is tied to this. I mentioned it earlier a little bit, but I had a playthrough where I was the Ottomans in the early modern period, and I was doing great. I was pretty turtled up, as you describe.
Hmm.
And then I made various discoveries that made gunpowder and other things potentially useful. And I needed saltpeter.
Mm.
And I didn't. I had one bit of saltpeter up in the Arctic, which I quickly annexed. And now I'm in a situation where it's kind of, and I'd kind of got into this funk where like I'd probably add a bunch of those stars for leveling up
Hmm.
like a couple of real time hours from now. But I know that if I do a couple of things, I could make it faster. And if I could get saltpeter from that neighboring state, if I could take that piece of land they control that I can see has the saltpeter, and I thought that this is a fantastic, pretty organic example of 19th century imperialism. I think this is, or even early modern
Early
imperialism.
modern, yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so I was like, that really tickled me. They might have just, maybe it was a perfect storm that everything clicked together correctly, but I thought it spoke well to the game that that happened.
Yeah.
That was pretty cool. That was because it really was like I don't have to invade those people and take their saltpeter, but if I did, it was not so
I
bad.
definitely could
Yeah,
happen.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Oh. Um, yeah, so I don't know. I mean, we can keep playing here and just see the advancement. I don't know how far away we are from advancing to the next era. It looks like we're pretty far, actually. We've already
Mm.
been at this for 45 minutes, it looks like. So,
But really quickly as
yeah, go
well,
ahead.
well, just pointed out, Bob, while you have this open, sorry to interrupt. For people watching, if you just look as well, there you have many different ways to get to the stars you need.
Yes.
And you actually you can, because I have done it. You can play the game that way. You can be very militarist, or you can focus on science, and you can benefit in that. So that's nice. Like there's a genuine way to guide your playthrough, and you can still play that game mechanic. Um, that I've had good experiences with that.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And you do have the option later on, when you are initially presented the option of transitioning to a new era, you can actually stay in the same era and just collect stars if you want. But then you could run into trouble if you do have competitors of them advancing into a new era with new units, etc. But you could stay, camp out in an era and grab all the stars in it before advancing on to the next one. And you do get these fame rewards, as you see here at the bottom, that increase your point totals. So if you do want to stay, and focus on building or focus on statics, you could do that. But then you run the risk of falling behind your opponents. And I guess, we might shut things off here, but I do want to say, with this idea of changing cultures, so like if we were to keep playing, we get to the classical era, you could change your culture. And one thing I would say is I think it does reflect kind of a multicultural approach to the history of societies and how these civilizations, which are treated by the Civilization series, Sid Meier's Civilization, as kind of these static, isolated entities, they are saying in this game that no, in fact, they are the result of multiple different cultural and societal influences, which I think it's a great message. But I would also say that it does come across as a little bit weird. I mean, I think maybe a lot of players might think that this approach, this multicultural approach, is more historically authentic. But I would say that, when we're talking particularly about the ancient era and even into the modern era, that there are these kind of boundaries between groups of people, even in the ancient era where civilizations and societies are separated only by a few hundred miles, you do have dramatic differences between, say, the Greeks and the Persians, or between the Egyptians and the Hittites, right? So, I mean, I would say on the one hand, it is more authentic or more interesting. It's certainly a separation from civilization to have these kind of multicultural empires, but at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's completely authentic. I think it kind of creates new problems rather than solving all the problems. Does that make sense, John? What do you think?
Oh yeah, completely. I think you're kind of you're kind of swapping one paradigm for another,
Yes, yes,
in how you're
exactly.
choosing to do it.
Yes,
And in the same way, like, I mean, we've talked about Civ a lot. I mean, I think many of our critiques of Civ are not meant to be negative critiques of Civ. Like, we both
yes,
love Civ,
yes.
and I think I agree with that. And and historians will talk about the fact that we talked earlier about the Egyptians fit onto this card. Like, the second you do that with any civilization, an historian's going to get upset with you, and rightly so. But
Yes,
so I think, yeah, I agree with all that, and I think it becomes a case of like, well, they settled on a certain paradigm. The paradigm fits the game mechanics they wanted to go for, and so now as video game players, we have variety in this 4X space, and that's good. But
yes.
I also agree that, yeah, I think if you think it's, maybe you do feel it solves a couple of problems that Civ poses inadvertently, but it then creates its own, and here we are.
It's not
We'll
as though,
never escape it.
yeah, it's not as though you've exchanged the train tracks in Civilization with a superhighway for Humankind. It's more like you've
Right.
just got a different set of train tracks for Humankind. And so I think the kind of multicultural approach, it's a welcome addition, but I would say that it kind of creates its own problems. And another thing that I think creates its own problems is the way that the game defines these civilizations or these groups that you're playing as. They call them empires. And so in Civilization, obviously, you call them civs, you call them civilizations. But in this game, there's a ready use of the word empire, which I think might be off-putting to a lot of players. Now, of course, speaking historically, empires, the development of empires are central to the development of human civilization. The vast majority of human history has been one in which there were empires. Empires are, if you're to take the totality of human history, recorded human history, empires are the most successful and the most popular government form. But I think it's a word that has come under a great deal of skepticism, and rightly so. And so, we often talk about how the word civilization is one that is from a bygone era and one that maybe is fallen out of favor for good reason. But I think the word empire also creates a lot of baggage in its own way. And so it's a little bit similar to the system of culture, right? It's like you're not creating a better version of the 4X issues. You're creating kind of a different version of it that maybe has its own problems, at least in my estimation.
No, I mean, I completely agree with all of that, and I think you get into a deeper question of even how narrative intersects with gameplay anyway, right? These are massive questions across the whole medium. I have to say, I'm already tempted. I feel so bad even saying this, because God bless them, they made a game in the pandemic, or they shipped a game during a pandemic, but I can't wait to see the DLC. And like, somewhere an Amplitude developer has woken in a cold sweat, but like, I can't wait to see it. And I want to see a Civ style, hey, here's a huge DLC that completely adds a whole layer of stuff. I would be excited. I'm sure it's like a long way away, but
I'm sure. Yeah.
I like what they did. But
Yeah.
I agree with all of that, and just is interesting. Yeah, Empire is kind of an interesting choice, but but they don't shove it in your face per se.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is,
Yeah.
like the narrator comes up and he's like, "Oh, Empire this,
Yeah.
Empire that." It's like, "Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure you want to say that?"
Yeah, I did the same. Part of me wonders, am I getting this game's tone? Like, going back to the narrator from earlier, is there tongue in their cheek with this guy?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they going for a completely po-faced serious? I can't tell.
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure
Yeah.
how serious they're trying to be.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. Okay, well, I think that does it for me, John. Anything else that you wanted to bring up?
No, there's nothing that jumps out to me. I mean, I keep saying how beautiful the game looks, but even like seeing those weather patterns and stuff,
Yeah.
go across.
And all
I
these
mean,
little
it's
fish
just,
down here. Love this. Love
yeah,
that. And the little elephant
yeah.
we saw earlier. He's somewhere over here. And just
I mean,
look at these things. Yeah.
I built a city beside a waterfall because I just thought it looked cool. Like that, I don't do that in Civ, and
Yeah.
I think I really would. I would encourage people who are intrigued. This is certainly worth a try for
Yes.
sure.
Yes.
I really think I really like a lot of things about this game, and I myself may buy myself a copy if I'm not using Xbox Game Pass anymore. It's good. It's yet another good Amplitude game. That's my final word. Yet another good Amplitude game.
Well, this is my first Amplitude game, and I would say that it makes me interested in playing some of their other titles. So, I mean, I think that's as good of an endorsement as I can give. Is it going to make me give up Civ? Definitely not, but it's something that I hope they build upon, because I think there's plenty of space for different 4X titles, especially ones that attempt to do things much, much differently from Sid Meier's Civilization. So, yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for joining us on this episode, John. Thank you for joining me on this stream.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, everybody, for watching.
Yeah. If you are interested in more videos and podcasts from History Respawn, please check out our website, historyrespawn.com. And if you enjoy our work, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/History Respawn. And until next time, goodbye.